Hello and welcome back to the Underhand Free Throw. I am Simon and I'm not going to be joined by Ian today. It's just going to be me. And today what I wanted to talk about is kind of put a cap on things that we went over in our video last week in our podcast that was just uploaded a couple of days ago, where we went over the trade deadline and all the moves and acquisitions that happened. But unfortunately, due to recording equipment issues, we weren't able to finish on the Blazers and all of the trades that they were involved in. Was saving that for last and just didn't get to it. But I think that's actually a good thing, because as a Blazers fan, I wanted some time to kind of like decompress and reflect on the trade deadline and really think about the future implications of all the moves that my favorite team made during the trade deadline and what it means for the next couple of years moving forward. So the Blazers the past few years have been really kind of a subject of controversy. For a long time it's been, well, we have Damian Lillard, the superstar player who's on this team that's just never going to be as talented as any of the teams that are true contenders in the Western Conference. And when it comes to, player by player, like, we just simply don't stack up, with the Warriors of the past few years or the Phoenix Suns now today. And what are we doing with Damian Lillard? Are we wasting his prime? And Damian Lillard, unlike many superstars, has not been wanting to move on from Portland. He wants to stay here, and so far all indications are he wants to finish his career. So what does that mean for the future of this franchise? It's really, really hard to build a team, especially a small market team, when you're pretty good but not great, and you're not necessarily getting the draft assets or young players to develop and see a lot of future improvement. It's definitely one of the hardest challenges an NBA GM can face. And although I don't necessarily think that the trades the Blazers made at the deadline push them very far in that direction, I do think that it's at least a small step in the right direction. So let's go over the trades that they made and kind of what that means for the future. So both trades were actually 4-team deals, and I'm not going to list all of the moving players and picks and everything. I'm just going to kind of talk about simply what went out from the Blazers and what was coming back to our organization. So the first trade was Josh Hart got sent out. He eventually made his way to the Knicks, and we traded a couple of picks as well, second rounders. And in return, Matisse Thybulle from the Sixers, Cam Reddish from the Knicks, and a lottery-protected Knicks first-round pick was received in return. The immediate reaction from a lot of this trade is, what is Portland doing? They just sent out the best player in this trade. But I think one thing that was important to note is Josh Hart was an expiring contract. And with the cap space situations that we're going to be facing this summer, re-signing him would be difficult, although there is no doubt that Josh Hart, at least currently, as of this season, is still a more valuable rotation player than either Cam Reddish or Thybulle. And we've gotten to see these two guys in action for a couple of games post-trade deadline. I don't think either one is necessarily blowing our socks off. Thybulle does provide some much-needed perimeter defense on this roster, something that we have always lacked for a long time. And he has been knocking down our threes, but it's a very small sample size, and it's probably unlikely to see that continue. And then Cam Reddish has been pretty decent as like a floor spacer and third or fourth option on offense, but doesn't really provide much of the like hustle or defensive intensity that Josh Hart did. So even though he has like the length and frame to be a good defender, he doesn't necessarily have the motor to provide that consistently. So as promising as so many teams have found Cam Reddish to be, he's kind of still a low impact rotation player, and I'd be surprised if that like really changes much in the future, although he is still young, so there's always that possibility. And then the other trade is, of course, Gary Payton was traded in another 4-team trade, ended up on the Warriors after I think there was the Pistons got involved as well and another team. And in return, we got Kevin Knox from the Pistons as well as 5 second-round picks. So all in all, we profited quite a bit draft pick-wise this trade deadline, 3 second-rounders and 1 protected first-rounder. There was a lot of controversy, obviously, with the Gary Payton trade because of the medical staff. He had an injury that he sustained while playing for the Warriors during the playoffs last year, and apparently had some sort of procedure during the offseason with it, and rehab just didn't progress as well as they had hoped, and he was playing through some pain, and it's now unlikely that he'll be available right away from the Warriors, and the Warriors might not have him available until kind of near the end of the season or by the time the playoffs start. All of this is very unfortunate, and without getting too involved in the discussion, all I can say is we've had a lot of medical staff issues historically in Portland, and can we just hire the right medical staff who can properly diagnose these players? Hopefully, the current staff seems to, let's just say, not be it. Okay, so now that we've gone over all the trades and all the controversy, let's kind of talk about the future for the Blazers, at least over the next couple of years. So Damian Lillard is 32 years old, and a lot of people like to bring up the track record of these small offensive guards as they don't necessarily age that well into their mid to late 30s. However, we have some examples of small guards who are kind of defying that trend lately with, Chris Paul still being a very high level, all-star quality player, at least maybe up until this season. But, well into his late 30s, Kyle Lowry was able to extend his prime into his mid 30s. And, just during these past couple of seasons is finally starting to see a drop off. But Damian Lillard, at least so far this season, is having the best season of his career. And the other thing to mention with him is he was an old rookie. He spent all 4 years in college and came out as a senior. So he doesn't necessarily have the same sort of miles on his tires that some of these other guards who are, drafted at 18, 19 years old and have played a full 15 seasons in the NBA already at this age have. So I do think there's a pretty good likelihood that, Dame's having a career year this year. He's averaging career high in points, and his efficiencies are, the best that they've ever been. I do think there's a good chance that we're going to see at least another 3 to 4 years of this before there starts to be any sort of significant decline. So we have a small window at least to build up a team that, is at least capable of making another conference finals run. So as a result of the trades that the Blazers made during this deadline, we undoubtedly got worse in the talent department for this very season. But we do have more salary cap flexibility this summer, and we have a couple more draft assets to work with, which if we're not necessarily planning on contending this season, which, currently we're not in the playoff picture as we speak and under 500. Hopefully that'll change by the end of the season. But improving, even if it's only a marginal amount over the course of the next couple of years, rather than making moves to improve this season, is definitely the way to go, in my opinion. And I did just want to say the potential downside of the trade is losing Josh Hart, especially if the additions of Tybal and Cam Reddish don't result in us getting an eventual rotation player, and both these guys are either gone this summer or just never end up playing significant playoff minutes for us, which is definitely a possibility. However, I will say, Josh Hart did have a really hard time fitting in Portland. There was rumored he had some kind of elbow injury and it was really affecting his shooting. He was still a great hustle player and a high energy defender. Although I will say his floor spacing wasn't necessarily what you'd love it to be, especially for a team that loves to play non-shooting bigs. And also, even though he gave a high level of effort defensively and had great energy on that end of the floor, he was pretty undersized and didn't necessarily have the physical ability to match up with larger wings, which is always what this team really struggles to defend. It's our, primary weakness. So I'll talk about what we necessarily need to do this summer to build for the next couple of years in a minute. But first, there's one final priority we have to do this year, and that is basically to make the playoffs, even if it's just as the 8th seed, sneak in through the play-in and actually make the playoff format. And the reason for that is because we owe a lottery-protected first-round pick to the Bulls, and for as long as we keep the lottery protections on that pick, we can't actually trade any future picks without either having that pick conveyed to the Bulls by making the playoffs and having that pick not land in the lottery, or by renouncing the pick. Say we miss the playoffs but just barely, and the pick is number 13 or 14 overall. We could renounce that pick, allow the Bulls to make the selection, and then our future first-round picks are available in any sort of future trades. And it sounds like the Blazers are still planning on trying to rebuild around Dame. They're going to want to be able to have those picks available for trade, the next time a disgruntled all-star wants out of their current situation, and just having the ability to trade those picks without worrying that we get super lucky in the lottery, renounce our pick, but then it ends up being number 4 overall or something crazy like that, which would end up being a disaster. Making the playoffs this year would just ensure that no scenario like that is even going to happen. So either way it happens, either making the playoffs or just having a really low lottery pick that we essentially sacrifice for the Bulls to be able to make that selection this year, then the Blazers can once again get involved in the actual trade market and put their sights on, say a star player the next time they become available. And I think that there are some trade possibilities. So first of all, this summer, I think the priorities are definitely to re-sign Jeremy Grant. He's just way too valuable a player to not re-sign him. He's such a high-level role player, excellent catch-and-shoot player, pretty good perimeter defender. Doesn't offer a whole lot of rebounding or rim protection or anything like that. I mean, you'd hope that a 6'9" guy would, but he's so great in so many other areas of the game. that it's definitely going to be worth re-signing him, as long as it's in the vicinity of like, 30 million or something a year, and not too much more than that. And that does sound like a lot, but also one thing that I'm trying to do is just adjust to the fact that this is the market now for a high level starting player. 25 to 30 million dollars a year. That's just what you pay for a guy that can score 20 points a game and provide some value on the defensive end of the floor, even if they're not a star, even if they don't have like some kind of super creation ability or off the dribble shot making ability. If you want a guy who can produce for you, you got to kind of pay them in order to make that happen. And then I listed a couple other possibilities here. So we really don't have any indication of what exactly the Blazers are definitely going to do this summer, and they might not even know themselves at this point. But I do think that one of two things needs to happen. Either we need to really move on from the Jusuf Nurkić experience. Unfortunately, he's just not really, well, A, healthy enough. He constantly gets injured, but also he's not really mobile and versatile enough to be the defensive anchor in a system that employs two small guards as our 2 point of attack defenders. Those being Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons. So if we're going to have these two guys on the court, we really need a guy who can provide a lot of value as kind of like a weak side defender, collapse to the rim once our guards inevitably get blown by, and just prevent things from being a layup line. So one of the main reasons the Blazers have struggled so much this season on defense is our two big men are Nurkić, who really just doesn't have the foot speed to be a center in a defensive system like this, or Drew Eubanks, who tries, but even though he's a very high energy dude, he's a little bit undersized and not quite athletic or lengthy enough to provide this role defensively. He's much more of like an offensive rebounding, rim pressuring, pick and roll big guy offensively is really, the reason why he's a decent backup center to have. But defense is not really where he brings it, and that's where this team is really hurting right now. And if you look at the upcoming free agents for this summer of guys who can be like a legit rim protector and do have that foot speed and versatility to kind of close off the rim, the options are pretty bleak. I mean, there's Brook Lopez, but the Bucks are probably going to try to re-sign him, and he doesn't exactly fit that role in the way that we want him to. He's, much more of just kind of like a drop big who works better in a system when you have guards that can fight over screens and prevent wide open threes from happening, which we don't, unfortunately, due to our backcourt. And then another option that's interesting, but still not like a perfect fit, is going to be Jakob Poeltl, who is almost assuredly going to re-sign with the Raptors. I mean, they gave up a first-round pick to trade for the guy, so I'm sure they are not going to want him to hit free agency. So that means one of two things needs to happen, in my estimation: either some kind of trade for a big man who can really provide that defensive role that we desperately need, or we might want to look into the possibility of trading Anthony Simons. And I don't necessarily love this idea because Anthony's still like such a young player. He's not, obviously the main struggle is his defensive fit and in some ways his offensive fit with Damian Lillard. There's a little bit of redundancy when they're both on the floor. He is an awesome shot creator and off the dribble shooter, but he's also a really good off the catch shooter. So I would hate to trade him unless the guy coming back in return just like really fits a need for the Blazers. And that very well may be. I do think with how much talent and promise Shaedon Sharpe has flashed this season in his rookie year, even in like pretty limited playing time and not having a huge offensive role, does provide some sort of safeguard behind trading Anthony Simons. We can trade Simons and not be screwed. We're still going to have, a potential really, really awesome backcourt mate for Damian Lillard, especially if we can find that elusive high-level two-way wing that Portland has always wanted and never quite been able to find, at least not two of them at the same time, or if we can get just like a really high-level center who's going to be able to help this team move forward to where it needs to be defensively. So in conclusion, I will admit that there is definitely not a clear path towards Portland being a contender. Definitely the things that would need to happen is, we need to see some like really high level development from Shaedon Sharpe within the next couple of years, just because this team is so desperate for, well, a second star, to tell you the truth, but in absence of that, just like really high level role players that excel in their role and are super efficient and are good on defense and can really amplify what Damian Lillard can still do. And if we're going to make that happen during Damian Lillard's prime, I really would not like to trade away the future of this team if we can avoid it, but I do think that some sacrifices are going to have to be made. It may be Anthony Simons, It may be a whole bunch of draft picks. I, for one, personally really hope it's not Shadon Sharp, but if this team is going to make another conference finals run and have kind of an outside shot of contention, we are going to have to trade some stuff in order to make that happen within the next couple of years, especially because after we re-sign Jeremy Grant and with all the other guys that are, restricted free agents or we have their bird rights on this summer that we're probably going to want to re-sign to fill out the roster, and that includes Reddish, Winslow, Tybal, Andrew Eubanks. All these guys are like rotation players that are valuable parts of the team. After we resign all those dudes, we're not going to have any cap space, especially Jeremy Grant is probably going to take up the majority of that. So the team pretty much is what it is prior to any kind of, trades or transactions we make this summer. So when we eventually make one, I think it's better if you're going to trade away the future to not do kind of like a half measure and like really go all in, trade for that star player and give up all the picks and all the contracts needed to make that happen, rather than just like trade for one or two decent role players, giving up like one or two of these future assets that we have available and just making the team like slightly better, but not really improving it to a level with which contention is a real possibility. So I think that's all for me. That's my ramble. That's my, cautious optimism on this team. From a long-term Blazers fan who's just trying to make sense of the moves that we did this offseason, I think they do make sense in some context, but also we're going to have to follow it up with the right moves this summer. So thank you for watching, and on the underhand free throw, you can always expect to find more NBA content. Usually it's not just me talking to myself. I'm typically joined by my co-host Ian. He's in all of our other videos and on our podcast, which is linked down in the description, and you can check out another video which we did together up here. And otherwise, we will see you next time. So thank you for watching the underhand free throw, and have a good one.